So I'm Emma. I'm here with Alexis to talk about what we've learned about disasters over the course of this term. So we started the term talking about natural disasters such as earthquakes and volcanoes. So what made you decide to choose an oil spill for your blog topic?
So because of my background in geography, I really appreciated all disasters, but I think natural disasters can be somewhat overplayed in terms of the topics, and I know a lot of people were choosing natural disasters in our class.
Yes.
So I wanted to do an oil spill. I was originally thinking of doing BP, but then because that one only happened in 2010 and it is only 2017, it's a little too early. So I went looking and found the first major oil spill in the U.S., which was Exxon Valdez.
Interesting. So you actually led into my next question. Do you think your background in geography influenced how you understood the course material?
Most definitely, yes. I think that it was really interesting to look at what I had learned previously in geography back through a historical lens, because that's not something we do in the department. But I definitely think that I had a better understanding of the underlying things that happen. So when we talked about some natural disasters like earthquakes or volcanoes, I knew the tectonic situations that happened underneath them, or even moving into the chemical disasters that we talked about. Those ones, I knew the difference between leaching and leaking and those types of terminologies that if you were from history, you might not have understood that much. So it was very interesting.
Yeah, no, sitting at your table, you knew everything that we were reading about. And whenever we were doing the group write-ups and everything, you just had your little bit to add in about geography.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. It's when you're in the program, you kind of eat, breathe, and sleep the program, so everything you do.
Well, that's nice. You got to take this course then, because you kind of got to combine geography and history together.
Yes, most definitely. There was another class that I took, and it also covered catastrophes, but we weren't allowed to work on them so hands-on. It was just kind of like, here's some of the major ones that the prof has chosen, and then come back on and I'll test you on the facts of them. Opposed to this one, it wasn't very fun at all.
No.
Opposed to this one where we got to dive into our own disasters and do something that we really appreciated, as well as I really enjoyed looking at other people's blogs, especially that are outside of the program, and having them be able to bring the historical, predominantly historical perspective in, and that was super interesting to see how they looked at disasters.
So with that knowledge and, since you just said you already took a similar course in geography, have your perceptions of disaster changed after taking this at all, or? Most
definitely.
Yeah?
100%. Just learning from the other students in the class with our group discussions and just the way that the class worked, that dramatically changed it, because I went in having the geography background of a disaster, and it's horrible, and just looking at what it does to the world in terms of moving the tectonic plates or spewing the lava everywhere, creating rocks, moving the earth, instead of the historical perspective of this is how it affected people and this is how people reported on it in the time. So that was super interesting part of it.
Interesting. So going back to your topic about oil spills, we picked a bad spot for this.
Well, it's okay. Someone's taking care of their hands.
I apologize, Dr. Egan, for that. So how do you think handling an oil spill differs from a natural disaster? So in terms of, disaster management and...
Dramatically, so dramatically. A natural disaster is set by not that much human error, because an earthquake, a human didn't precipitate the earthquake. The tectonic plates moved and it affected humans, and that's the same way with other earthquakes, but volcanoes and stuff like that, or tsunamis. That stuff all is just triggered by the natural patterns of this earth, opposed to my oil spill that was triggered by human impact and then affected other humans by one human's choice, and thinking that they move. And I was recently looking at some stuff, and it was super interesting because the stuff that I was looking at was kind of humans wanted to live in this place, and that's why they're affected, instead of this human made the choice to do something bad, and then and then affect other humans. So that was
Okay.
like an interesting perspective on it.
Fair enough. So we've spent a lot of the course actually talking about how you can plan for disasters. Do you think an oil spill is something you can plan for?
Yes and no. I think you can take the precautions needed to allow that to not happen, such as like in the case of the Exxon Valdez, that ship was only single hulled and not double hulled. So instead of putting a shell that can be punctured into an airspace or a cavity instead of puncturing right into the oil tank like it did on the Exxon Valdez, that's something you can plan for. Similarly, I know I read part of your blog and tying it into the London fires, that like building homes like a little bit farther apart is kind of something that you can plan for in terms of fires as well.
Yeah.
I think there's also like not only planning to prevent the disaster like single or double hulls, also there's not really like, I feel personally that there's not really like a need to pull ships with oil through iceberg laden waters in Alaska in the winter.
This is true. Yes.
Because I think you're kind of playing with fire in that sense, that you're asking for something to happen because you're not taking, like, you're doing something that you really don't need to do. And this world has become so reliant on oil and oil derivatives, although we don't necessarily need them. Like, we survived before plastic and we'll probably survive after plastic. It's not something we actually need to use.
No, but we've become very reliant on it. I mean,
Almost definitely, yes.
everything I can think of really has some kind of plastic material, like our phones.
100%. Phones,
Exactly.
computers, everything that we touch or use has plastic in it. So I think that's why what triggers the need for like oil and bringing oil in the waters of Alaska in the middle of this winter.
This is true.
I think that you can also plan similarly to like post-disaster, like in your fire situation, where you can put in fire suppression systems or water tanks and hydrants and stuff like that. And like in oil, you can plan to have all the materials needed close at hand so that that doesn't then transfer into other things. So with the Exxon Valdez, the problem was that one of the problems was that it took so long to clean up the oil. If they had booms readily available and they could deploy them right away and kind of trap the oil in a certain location around Bly Reef and the ship, then the ship would have still leaked oil, but it wouldn't have gone all over the Sound and affected all the people living there and the ecosystem that's so fragile around it as well.
Yeah.
So I think that that's like something like you can pre-plan for like cleaning up the disaster if it happens, because probably will, leading into like the whole this is technology and like, we're tempting technology with disasters and doing things. And
Fair enough. So do you think a disaster such as the Exxon Valdez has as much of a human impact as something such as, a volcano or an earthquake or a fire?
Yes and no. It kind of depends where it is. Because we're not necessarily mining for oil and transporting oil through like New York City or major cities in Japan where earthquakes and tsunamis are going to happen, it's not going to affect as large of a population. But because of so Exxon Valdez is in Alaska, where a lot of people rely on the land to either eat or make money. And in that sense, this is crippling for those people. It's not like we're destroying some buildings and these people are still going to go on. This is destroying their livelihoods and they're going to starve to death and those types of things. So I think disasters are bad. just they're horrible.
And on that point, disasters are bad.
Yeah.
All right.
Horrible.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.